Penn State men's basketball competed in the Emerald Coast Classic held in Niceville, Florida this past weekend. The team had a strong showing against LSU, but ultimately fell short. Still, the Nittany Lions bounced back with a win over Oregon State. Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of men's basketball on Penn State Sports Night. I'm Lexy Leidlein alongside Zach Gershman and Carlos Garcia. We are here to recap the Penn State men's basketball season so far as Micah Shrewsbury and the Pride currently sit with a 4-2 record. So gentlemen, like I just said, Penn State sits with a 4-2 record. They recently just split the Emerald Coast Classic, 1-1, losing to LSU, but ultimately beating Oregon State. Also, they sit second to last in Big Ten standings, just above the 3-3 Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Zach, what have you seen from the Nittany Lions so far these past 3 weeks?
Well, the standings with Rutgers and the rest of the Big Ten is going to change a lot as Big Ten plays about a star, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But honestly, we've learned a lot from this Penn State basketball team. You know, there are a lot of questions entering the season. How's the team going to rally around a new head coach, especially with how it ended last year? And we've learned a lot from them through our fight in these games and their defense. You know, that's something that Micah Shrewsbury really prides himself off of, is the defense. And they kept a high-scoring team like LSU, who's top 5 in the SEC in scoring, kept them to a good amount of points and took them to overtime. Now, that overtime game, they got to rebound better than that, because otherwise it wouldn't have been an overtime. If they would have rebounded, especially with offensive rebounds for the LSU Tigers, if they would have boxed them out more, it would have been an overtime game, and honestly, it could have went in Penn State's favor. But with Oregon State, that's where I think we learned the most about this team. People might not remember because Oregon State's in the Big 12 and they might not be the best basketball program out there. They were in the Elite 8 last year. Now still their head coach is the same. A lot of their players are still the same. Penn State beat them 60-45, and that's a very good win for Penn State, for Micah Shrewsbury especially. So what we've learned about this team is we've learned that they know how to fight. We know that they know how to play defense. It's just making sure that they keep their foot on the pedal and not give up the simple stuff.
Well, Lexi, like you mentioned, Penn State right now sitting at 4-2 record, but I really haven't seen anything from this team so far. You know, there have been a couple positives. You know, on the offensive side of the ball, they lead their opponents in field goal percentage from three-point land and from the free throw line. So the offense seems to be working out. And Zach, like you mentioned, the defense, that's really what's been the catalyst for this team. That's what's keeping them in these close games. And we saw in the LSU game, that game went to overtime, and LSU is a tough opponent. So just being able, even though they lost, just being able to hold up with a team that was obviously, they were undersized and they had like a ton of great shooting from the SEC opponent in LSU, I think they were able to really keep their composure together. My only issue is that, like I mentioned, they're undersized, and we're going to see a lot of these tough losses and big losses. Losing to UMass by 25 points, that's unacceptable, right? UMass had a great game shooting from the three-point range, and whatever, some might call it a fluke, that might not happen, but I think that if you really want to keep up, especially heading into Big Ten play in the rest of the season, where the Big Ten is very competitive, there are a lot of teams that can be able to make the tournament, and there's going to be a lot of teams in the top 25. I think you're really going to have to show that your defense is what's keeping you in these close games, because if not, it's going to be UMass all over again whenever you play Ohio State, Michigan, and Purdue.
I'll jump in for a quick second there. We know through history, Penn State plays to their opponent's skill. That's why they were able to keep up with LSU. That's also why they were able to beat Oklahoma State. But that's how they lose to a team like UMass. The simple stuff, as we've said, the turnover battle and the offensive rebounds, that's the type of stuff Penn State's going to need to eliminate in order to even contend in the Big Ten.
Now that we've looked at the big picture of the team, let's zoom in on a specific player or two. There's been some key Penn State players that have produced some astounding performances that have helped lead the team to a winning record. Carlos, let's start with you. Which player have you seen so far that has impressed you the most?
Well, I think the obvious names have to be guys like Seth Lundy and Sam Sessoms, which I'll let Zach talk a little bit about that. But a guy I think that has definitely stood out has to be John Harrar. You know, the big man right now, he's averaging 10 points a game, 11 points a game, or 11 rebounds a game on 70% shooting from the field. Those are some excellent numbers for a big man. My only issue with him is that he's 6'9". He's tied for being one of the tallest guys on the team. So there's obviously that lack of height on the team, but he's still able to compete like we saw in the LSU games. Although there were a little bit of out-rebounding, I still think he's able to compete with those bigger, stronger, physical guys, and he's really what's keeping together on the defensive unit for this team. So he's definitely got to be the guy that stood out for me.
Yeah, the King of Delco coming back to Penn State, which was a really big deal for this Nittany Lions team, because if you didn't have John Harrar, who do you have to play the big man spot? Because of the lack of size, as you mentioned, you're going to have the recruiting class in the coming year to change that a little bit, but for now, that's a big issue, as you mentioned. With Sam Sessoms being one of the standout stars, in my opinion, we've seen how he's able to turn on the switch and really dominate. You know, you have guys like Jalen Pickett, who's transferred here from Siena. He's been playing really well so far. You have guys like Miles Dredd that have been playing all right. They've been dealing with their role. He's been coming off the bench a little bit, has not been getting as many minutes as years past. But Sam Sessoms has really been the energizer buddy for this team. He's had to drive into the paint against a bigger team like LSU. And we were able to see how he really changed the tide in that LSU game because of his heart and that Philly toughness, honestly, to go right into the paint and just get a big bucket and get a big bucket when it was necessary. So that's why I would say he's the standout star so far.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Carlos. John Hare has really been leading that thin big man group. But like you said, Zach, Sam Sessom's performance against LSU is really showing why he is one of the most talented people on the Penn State roster. Now, I know we were talking about Big Ten play, and we're all excited for that to kick off on Friday. But let's start with the Miami Hurricanes game this Wednesday night. So, Zach, what are your predictions and expectations for this matchup?
Well, this is going to be a game that Penn State needs to win because of the name, because they're playing Miami in the ACC tournament. We saw when they played Wake Forest back in 2019, that was a very big win for Pat Chambers and that Penn State team. That's honestly what sparked some national attention with this Penn State team with Lamar Stevens and Mike Watkins. This is where Micah Shrewsbury really needs to set the tone and the momentum entering Big Ten play. You have a big matchup on Friday against Ohio State and Jamari Wheeler, which is a big deal for this Penn State crowd, seeing Jamari Wheeler coming back wearing that scarlet. But I know that with Penn State, their game against Miami, it's the simple stuff that we keep reiterating. The offensive rebounds, the turnover battle. That's what they need to win. And if they win, they could very easily beat this Miami team who has not been so sharp throughout the season so far, although it's still early for both of these teams, for Miami and for Penn State. This is a big game.
This is definitely going to be a huge game. You know, the Hurricanes are probably one of the best teams in the ACC, and they've always been, for the past decade or so, a very good team, solid team. But I think that there's going to be two keys that Penn State needs to have in order to win this game. Number one, it's got to be the three-point shooting. On the season, they're shooting 37% from three-point line. That's a pretty decent number. That's in their wins. In their losses, 28%. That number drops, and that's been a key factor of why they've lost these close games. You know, we saw in the LSU game that they shot 17% from three-point range. They went to overtime, and they could have easily won that game had they made a couple more three-pointers. I know that's easier said than done, but they definitely have to find a way to get open shots and take smarter shots. Another key that I'm seeing is the free throws. I cannot stress how important free throws are in the game of basketball. The team is right now currently shooting 71% from free throw line. That needs to be higher, at least 75, 80%. I know that's a big number, but when you get into, especially in the Big Ten play versus teams like Ohio State, Michigan, Purdue, you're going to be getting in these close games that are going to be based on who can make the most free throws in crunch time. And if you can make that, that's going to be 2, 3, 4 losses that are going to be tacked onto your record, and that could potentially impede on making the NCAA tournament or having a lower seed in the Big Ten tournament. So three-pointers and free throws are what's going to be the two keys to the UM game and the Ohio State game on Friday.
Yeah, like you shortly said, Zach, this is a big game. It's a Big Ten ACC challenge, and like we saw in the Emerald Coast Classic, Penn State went 1 for 1. They did a pretty good job against LSU, even though they fell short, but they ultimately beat Oregon State. So I think Miami's going to be a real test for them. I haven't been to a game presented by Tires, this game being presented by Continental Tire, but we'll have to see how this matchup goes and see how Penn State stacks up against other Big Ten schools this season. Well, that's all for this edition of Penn State men's basketball on Penn State Sports Night. For Zach Gershman and Carlos Garcia, I'm Lexy Leidlein. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.